Hey folks, we're about to start another episode of Ask Us Anything about electrochemistry. But before we begin, because we have some extra time, there are a few things I'd like to go over first. While we're waiting for the live stream to start, type your question into the chat. The sooner we get your question, the sooner we'll be able to answer it when the live stream starts. We usually try to answer questions in the order that we receive them, but it's definitely possible that we get so many questions that when your question comes up, we're out of time. If you are a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 YouTube member, you do get priority in us answering your question. You also have the opportunity to join us on the stream to either share slides or talk to us in person about your specific electrochemistry research questions. If you are a Tier 1 or Tier 2 member on our YouTube channel, you will find in the community post the link and password to join us on our broadcasting platform.
Five times by having multiple things open.
We get a lot of questions about electrochemistry, whether it's through our YouTube comments, webinars, email, phone conversations. We get lots of questions from people about electrochemistry. And sometimes responding to a YouTube comment or trying to describe a cyclic voltammogram over the phone isn't always the easiest way to teach or describe electrochemistry. That's why we created this live stream. In the Ask Us Anything About Electrochemistry live stream, you can ask us any questions you have about electrochemistry, and we can use better tools and take more time to describe some of these electrochemical processes to help you with your research and understanding of electrochemistry. Now, in our time of doing this live stream, we've observed that if you ask a very, very specific question, we might not be able to answer it. It'll be a little bit too specific for us. On the other side, if you ask a very broad question and you're interested in just a very broad understanding of cyclic voltammetry, we have separate tools, we have other resources to help you. So we do have a YouTube video on cyclic voltammetry, an introduction to the subject. And if you're interested in more of a long-form course on, say, electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, we have a 5-part EIS webinar series for our Tier 2 YouTube members that you can access at any time. Now, if you weren't aware, Pine Research Instrumentation is a company that produces a wide array of high-quality electrochemical research equipment, from potentiostats to electrodes, electrochemical rotators, cells, different types of accessories. Pine Research has been supporting electrochemistry research and teaching for decades. Recently, we have developed new electrochemical simulation software called Aftermath Live. Aftermath Live is an online streaming platform where you can simulate popular electrochemical techniques like cyclic voltammetry. It's a powerful research tool, as you might simulate a cyclic voltammogram to support an electrochemical mechanism for your redox reaction that you're studying. But Aftermath Live and cyclic voltammetry simulation is also a very powerful tool when it comes to just learning electrochemistry. In fact, in previous episodes of the live stream, we have used Aftermath Live and our simulation software to answer some of the questions that you have. If you are watching this on YouTube, you can get a 10% discount on your first month of the basic and research editions of Aftermath Live by using the coupon code PINEYouTube10 when you're at checkout. Aftermath Live is a powerful tool and you can cancel your subscription at any time. Go to aftermathlive.com to check it out. Link is in the description below. Our live streams are normally on Fridays from 1 to 3 p.m. They normally last about 2 hours, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. If you miss the live stream, you'll always be able to watch it on our YouTube channel, and in the description we put timestamps for every question that was asked. This way you can look through the description and find the questions that are most relevant to your research and then watch those at your leisure. Also, we apologize in advance if we mispronounce your name. if on a YouTube channel, you can put anything you want as a name. It could be a Pokemon, it could be a string of numbers. But if we call you out and we accidentally mispronounce your name, we apologize in advance. Lastly, please do not spam the chat. We've had numerous instances of people either talking about inappropriate things or constantly filling the chat up with some kind of spam. We will remove you if you do that. Let's keep the chat very clean and just talk about electrochemistry. Sometimes it takes a while before we're able to answer your question. So if you keep typing your question into the chat and spam the chat, then we will remove you from the chat. But if it's been a while and we may have forgotten about your question, one message as a gentle reminder is all that's required. All right, I think that's all of the housekeeping things. Now, let's start the live stream.
All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the live stream. I'm Alex, and my colleague Neil is not here today. He actually just came back from the Electrochemical Society meeting, Prime, in Hawaii, and is a bit jet lagged right now. And so I will be your host today, and let's get to it. We got a couple questions that just came in, and we will start answering them. If you, of course, if you have a question or you're watching, please type it in the chat, and then I'll try to get to it as soon as possible. Sai Yash is asking how to calculate the electrochemically active surface area, or the electrochemical surface area in this case, in a cyclic voltammogram, specifically in CV. It's a very good question. So let's actually share our screen, and let's go here, and I'm just going to check because I am riding solo today. It is just me doing this, so let's see. Okay, all right, so I want to know how to calculate the electrochemically active surface area using cyclic voltammetry. So to do so, let me actually draw a cyclic voltammogram. So just to kind of make sure that everybody's on the same page, we have our working electrode material. Let's say it's maybe a glassy carbon disc or something. Let's say it's something like that. And the glassy carbon may have a rough surface. It's not necessarily going to be geometrically smooth. So we need to find a way to determine what is the electrochemically active surface area of our glassy carbon electrode. This is actually not really the best picture. It should be a little bit something like this. It's a little bit better. Still not a great picture, but you have glassy carbon and you want to calculate the surface area. In a cyclic voltammogram, there are several ways, but generally speaking, this is, in my opinion, the only way through cyclic voltammetry to determine what the electrochemically active surface area is. So in CV, you have your voltage on the x-axis, your current on the y-axis. We're going to use IU-PAC convention. So positive potentials are up and to the right. Positive current is an oxidation current, and negative current is a reduction. So let's say we are oxidizing some species. We get a voltammogram that looks a little something like this, and like so. All right, it's a weird voltammogram, not the best, but it'll do. So how do we determine the ECSA? And of course, you can do this for any kind of electrode. Platinum is perhaps the most well-known in terms of the methodology for determining the electrochemically active surface area. But what you would want to do is you'd want to use the Randles-Sevcich equation. And I'm just going to pull that up very quickly. So let me see. Sorry, I'm using a slightly new... we have upgraded Restream because we've been doing this so much. So I'm getting used to some of the new cool controls and stuff. So I wanted to show you the Randles-Sevcich equation. It's this guy right here. Randles-Sevcich equation states that the peak current in your cyclic voltammogram from the forward sweep is equal to this big constant, 2.69 times 10 to the 5 times n to the 3/2. That's the number of electrons transferred, times the area of the electrode. That is what we're interested in solving, times the concentration, times the scan rate, nu to the 1/2, sometimes referred to as upsilon, but I think it's nu. And then times the diffusion coefficient raised to the 1/2 power. All right. So A is a calculable thing in this equation. We can take the peak current, right? So we can take the peak current, which is this guy right here in our forward sweep, and we can relate it back to all this stuff. Now, to determine the area, the electrochemically active surface area, we need to know what everything else is besides A, besides the area. It means that we need to know what the concentration of the analyte is. We need to know the scan rate, which is relatively straightforward. The concentration should be something that you yourself have determined, because you created the solution. The number of electron transferred should be known. And most of the time, people are, of course, I should also mention this is the form of the Randall-Sebzich equation at room temperature. And then the diffusion coefficient is typically something that we're actually trying to look up or we're trying to determine for ourselves. That's like a calculable thing. But that is not what we're going to solve for. We're going to assume what the diffusion coefficient is. You may even want to use a literature value of the diffusion coefficient to determine the electrochemically active surface area. So this is basically what you would do to calculate the ECSA in cyclic voltammetry. You would determine, you would get the peak, you'd find the peak here. You wouldn't use this one, right? So if my voltammogram was like so, if it started here and I was scanning this direction, this is the peak current, not this guy. You wouldn't want to use this. This current value would not necessarily be accurate for your experiment. You'd want to use this peak current, and then you would want to relate it back to not that one, to the Randall-Sebzich equation. You'd want to relate it back to this and solve for A. So that is the way you can do it. And the neat thing is, you can basically do this with any molecule that you want. Not any molecule. There are certain molecules that are just well understood, well characterized. So ruthenium hexamine in aqueous systems is a great option. Ruthenium hexamine can be a little expensive. Some people use ferrocyanide, the either ferri or ferrocyanide. So that's an iron complex that's much less expensive and works pretty well. Sometimes it sticks to surfaces, but if you are just doing cyclic voltammetry and then you're getting that peak current from your reversible voltammogram, you can use that value, sort of say. And then if you're in a non-aqueous system, you might want to use a molecule like ferrocene. So ferrocene tends to work very well, and both ferrocene, ferrocyanide, ruthenium hexamine, all of these molecules have been very, very well studied, and you should know that within a certain electrolyte solution, there will be a literature value of the diffusion coefficient that should be known, or you can do some kind of approximation. But you'll be able to then use those values, the diffusion coefficient, the scan rate that you determine from your CV experiment, the concentration that you made, so weigh it out as carefully as you possibly can, and then you have a constant that's at room temperature, and you should be able to solve for the area. And I would keep the geometric area in mind. I'd also calculate that just so that you determine that the area that you calculate with CV is comparable to the geometric area. It's on the same order of magnitude. One of the hardest things about doing or using the Randall-Sebzich equation is that the units can get very complicated very quickly. So do keep that in mind when you are calculating the area. The last thing to keep in mind when it comes to determining the electrochemically active surface area is if you use another redox species, and even ferrocene, ferricyanide, ruthenium hexamine, they're still relatively big molecules. So there is a chance that because it's such a big molecule, it's not actually getting all the surface area, right? When we think about calculations of the electrochemically active surface area with a platinum electrode, polycrystalline platinum, and we use hydrogen adsorption, hydrogen is very small. It's very, very easy for hydrogen to adsorb onto the surface, and hydrogen is small. It's the smallest atom. So whether it's hydrogen atom or protons getting reduced, it's the smallest. So it's absolutely going to fit on the surface and determine the kind of bare minimum electrochemically active surface area. It's possible that your molecules that you oxidize and reduce to do the CV experiment might be big and could potentially block certain sites. Highly unlikely, somewhat unlikely, but something to keep in mind when determining the electrochemically active surface area. So Sayash, I hope that was helpful. Please let me know if you have any further questions or if that explanation was sufficient for you. If it wasn't, please let me know and I can try to get back to you on perhaps clarifying anything that you have. All right. All right. Very good. All right. So moving on, there was a question that came in from Then Mosier 8R. Again, as I said in the intro video, I apologize if I mispronounce anybody's names. If you come in on YouTube or other platforms, which I'm hoping to actually expand the number of platforms that people can watch the live stream on. But if you're coming in on another platform, you could choose any Twitter handle or X handle or YouTube account name that you want. So I apologize if I mispronounce something. So then Mosier R is asking how to calculate the sensitivity of the electrochemical sensor. That's a good question. I will say that I might not know the exact methodology from, say, an analytical chemistry perspective. But generally speaking, the sensitivity of an electrochemical sensor should be based on whether you can, should be based on the limit of detection, sometimes called LOD, the limit of detection for the species, right? That'll actually, in a way, determine the sensitivity. So what I mean by that is, again, let me share my screen and show you. Let's just say, all right, so that's just the cyclic voltammogram. Let me make sure that that's showing up. It's good. So I'm just going to use this lasso tool, get rid of all this. Oops. All right, so let's say you have some kind of sensor. It's an electrode. All right, so you have some pins here that you will connect to some kind of device. Those pins lead to your electrodes. And then you have, maybe you have another electrode here. Maybe you have another electrode here. This is kind of a similar design to the Pine Research screen printed electrode. And if you're interested, our screen printed electrodes do act as nice templates for electrochemical sensors. So people use it for teaching purposes, but also for sensors. So let's say you put your stuff on the working electrode here, right? So that's where your working electrode is. Okay. So now you want to determine the sensitivity, otherwise limit of detection, which is to say, I believe that my sensor can detect, let's just say it's lead, right? So PB, right? And maybe it's plus, it's an ion. You're detecting lead in its ionic form. So let's say you're doing, so what you actually need to do to determine the limit of detection is you need multiple concentrations of lead. And sometimes nowadays sensors work in ppm or ppb, so parts per million, so parts per million or parts per billion in terms of limit of detection. So for every 1 million things out there, one of them, 1 part per million, is what you can detect, which is quite high. Parts per billion, 1 out of a billion, 1 out of 10 to the 9 is how many you can detect parts per billion. Parts per trillion is also a thing, but that's very difficult, and even to a certain degree, that limit is hard. But your sensor and the instrument that it's connected to, right? So this is connected to an instrument, maybe a potentiostat, but some kind of instrument. And so your limit of detection, your sensitivity, will also be based on the instrument that you're using. So it's based on your instrument and it's based on your screen printed electrode or your sensor itself. Okay, so both of these will determine the limit of detection. It will determine how sensitive it is, your system for the species. Now, to determine the limit of detection, to determine the sensitivity, you need to create various solutions. You need to create maybe a solution that's 100 ppm of lead, or 10 ppm of lead, or 1 ppm of lead, and then you also need something like 100 ppb and 10 ppb and 1 ppb of your lead thing. So you need to make a solution of this. This is just taking a little bit of lead in whatever form you can get it, or the form that is important for your sensor experiment. And then you need to do a kind of electrochemical experiment, or you may not even be doing electrochemistry. You could be doing spectroscopy. And then you need to see, in the event where, let's say, chronoamperometry is actually a pretty good technique for determining, that's used for quantitative analysis, because it's actually pretty fast. In chronoamperometry, you are stepping the potential. You're measuring the current as a function of time. So this is what we apply. So this is time. This is potential. We hold the potential at some value, and then we step it, and then hold it. And what we end up getting is a kind of spike in the current, followed by a gradual decay. I recently made, and by recently I mean last month, I made a video about chronoamperometry, CA, chronoamperometry, that describes the technique in more detail. And within really making measurements in, after the electrical double layer is charged and here, so within a relatively short time, maybe within a couple seconds, you can get an analytical measurement based on the Cottrell equation. So you might use the Cottrell equation, which I will just show you briefly here. So the Cottrell equation is this guy. So let me actually, so it's a little busy. So let me at least just show you this. You can just see my mouth going right now. So let's see. So right here with the Cottrell equation, the current is equal to the number of electrons transferred, Faraday's constant, the area, the diffusion coefficient, the concentration of your species, all divided by the square root of pi and time. So this is a 1 over the square root dependence on time type of experiment. So in this case, the concentration of your species is what you're solving for. The current that you measure as a function of time. And the nice thing is you can actually measure quite a bit of current within a reasonable time frame, because you can integrate the area under this curve. So let me just share my screen again briefly, so you can calculate the area under the curve. Let me hide this for now. So this little area T here, you can calculate the area under the curve relatively quickly, and with some calculations, you can determine the charge. You can also just look at the direct current, and then relate that to a concentration. So how good your data looks when you go from 100 to 10 to 1 to 100, as you decrease this, going from ppm to ppb, you'll find that this data, you may not actually get anything. You may actually get a small spike in the current that's not associated with, in this case, maybe the reduction of lead, for example, right? The reduction of lead might be the thing, the electrochemical reaction that allows your sensor to work. So if that's the case, the reduction of lead, and you're getting a reduction current in this case, some of this is just double layer charging, and you won't be able to, maybe measure that if you're unable to detect any lead, if no lead was actually being reduced during this experiment. Now, that is a function of your sensor. That's also a function of your instrument. You must check your instrument settings. And of course, if you're looking at something like commercialization of an instrument, of a sensor, then you're really going to want to know what sensitivity setting you have. So let me show you something just very quickly. So this is our Aftermath software. Our Aftermath software is what's used to control our potentiostats. I don't have one connected right now. But if I go to the Chronoamperometry experiment, there's this current range. And the current range has a wide variety of different possible current values. So you may have a 1 milliamp range, you may have a 10 milliamp range. This depends on the instrument, the potentiostat. But down here, like plus minus 100 nanoamps, that's where you're going to be hitting the limitation. So maybe you can hit 1 part per trillion, but your instrument couldn't fundamentally get to 1 part per trillion because it would require picoamps or femtoamps of current, right? It actually has to measure a very, very small amount. So that is that's another thing that you should keep in mind while you're trying to determine the sensitivity. But I think sensitivity levels are usually described as parts per million or parts per billion. So it has a detection limit or a sensitivity of 5 parts per billion. It's like it can detect that much lead accurately. So then Moshe, I think hopefully that answers your question in some regard. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll try to, or further questions on the subject, and I'll try my best to answer them. All right, going down. Let's see. Actually, I just want to get a quick thing. Tuichi, I'm on vacation, but I want to say hello. Please could be able to go work. Thank you. Good seeing you. I think I know who Tuichi is. And I think I may have seen you in Hawaii just via picture. But I hope all is well. Thank you for saying that. Okay, let's go to the next one. Devon is asking, I'm trying to do EIS with an EDAQ leakless reference, but I'm having a hard time. I've heard you add a capacitor with a platinum wire in parallel to the reference. What do the capacitor and platinum wire do? This is a great question. This is... Oh, wait. Oh, let me just make sure. Oh, this is Tarek. All right, sorry. Tarek is Tarek. Tarek, thank you, Tarek. Then I guess you saw your brother Waleed in Hawaii. Okay, so Devon's asking, okay, yeah, so a leakless reference electrode, and he wants to add capacitor. Yes, so this is what's known as a reference electrode shunt. Let me describe this. So, so what's happening, and let me just make sure everything looks good. Okay, so what's happening is you have a reference electrode, and it's a leakless. I don't know enough about the technology, but I'm assuming maybe it's silver chloride, and you just have some kind of special magic frit that makes connection to the solution. You have silver chloride in your reference electrode, and then you have it in parallel with a capacitor and a platinum wire. So this is a platinum wire. Okay. And this is typically used for EIS. So what happens, and then let me just describe this as silver chloride. Okay. So you have this in a solution. Okay. And then when you're doing EIS, you tend to, so you have the positive Z real on the x-axis, and they have minus Z imaginary. So you've been having some issues doing EIS, and it's been recommended to you that you should use a shunt, a capacitor with a with a platinum wire connected. So this is what happens. So in the high frequency region, so let's just say this is what you want your signal to look like. In this high frequency region, right, we're talking around the 1 megahertz range. At high frequency, the impedance of a capacitor decreases. It effectively almost goes to 0. What's happening when you are making an EIS measurement is you are, of course, measuring what's happening at your working electrode with respect to a counter electrode, or with a reference electrode. Sorry. With respect to a reference electrode. Normally, you're making a measurement against silver chloride. At high frequencies, this is a very odd and unique thing that happens, but it turns out that the glass of your silver chloride reference electrode, or even your leakless reference electrode, there's kind of two paths for current to be measured when you have this kind of setup. It can go through the frit. That's one path for current. It doesn't directly go. It's a very, very small amount of current. It's tiny, very, very small. But it can go through here, and that's maybe in the 1 kilo ohm maybe of resistance to go through this path. Maybe 10 kilo ohms. Similarly, there is also another path. Because you have an electrolyte solution, and inside here is silver chloride, potassium chloride, salt typically, you actually have charge. That's very bad. You typically have charge. Maybe it's positive here. It's minus here. You have charge in between a dielectric. So whether your leakless electrode is plastic or if it's glass, it's a dielectric. It's non-conducting. That in and of itself is a capacitor. And it typically is in the range of 8 picofarads. So what happens is at very high frequencies, at frequencies like this, and let's just remember the impedance of a capacitor is equal to 1 over, I believe it's C J omega. So that is to say that if the capacitance increases, the impedance decreases. As the frequency increases, the impedance decreases. As the frequency gets smaller, the impedance gets smaller. And if the capacitance gets smaller, or if the capacitance gets larger, if it's a big capacitor, then the impedance gets smaller. But if the capacitance is actually quite low, in this case we have 8 picofarads of capacitance, this number actually is somewhat reasonably substantial. This actually becomes a somewhat reasonably substantial impedance, even at high frequency. And it turns out that at high frequency, this pathway becomes more favorable than this pathway. And when the path for the measurement is through the wall, it creates errors and problems in the high frequency region. I bet you don't see a lot of issues with your leakless reference electrode in the low frequency region or mid to low frequency region. And let me just make sure that I'm not getting any further comments from Devon. No, I'm not, which is just good to know, just good to see. So there is this other path, because really the resistance here is just a resistor, and it shouldn't really cause problems even if there's a high resistance. It's this phase delay associated with capacitance that actually causes problems. So we have this problem in the high frequency region. This pathway actually is has a lower impedance than this pathway, and current will flow in a way through the glass or the casing of your reference electrode. Now, what people do to overcome this, you mentioned you having a platinum wire connected to a counter electrode, or connected to a capacitor. They may choose, so a platinum wire is highly conductive, right? Highly conductive. Not a problem having current go through the platinum wire. This capacitor here becomes now the new limit, sort of say. So someone may put a nanofarad or even a microfarad capacitor here. And when they do that, they are effectively changing this equation, because if this value is large, you know, when 8 picofarads is actually a pretty competitive impedance, then this becomes the path of least resistance. That's where your measurement is made. But if we now have a nanofarad capacitor, well, at high frequency, nanofarad, this becomes a lower impedance than this guy. I think I am doing that. Yeah, as this is higher, then this value gets smaller. So when this is bigger, if you have a higher or a larger capacitance here in the shunt, in this connect to the platinum wire, connect to your reference electrode, then this becomes the path of least resistance in the high frequency region. Current will not flow through your silver chloride reference electrode to make the measurement of the potential. So that's what people are doing. They add this shunt, if you will, to overcome the high impedance noise, or the high noise, due to just the fact that there's this kind of strange capacitor here. The fact that there's charge on both sides of this reference electrode, sort of say. Now, what ultimately happens is that once you start to move to lower frequencies, this becomes the path, and it becomes the only path, because the impedance of this, as the frequency drops, then this becomes bigger, and current no longer flows through either one of these paths. But you have to be careful, because you have to compare this value and this value to make sure that, well, current isn't still flowing through this platinum wire, because you are making measurements on your working electrode with respect to something that's different than silver chloride. It is with respect to this platinum wire, which could have any potential. You know, it's not silver chloride, the known reference. So that's what it is, and why. Let's see. So it's like, why do we have this? And I realized that this thing is actually kind of, I need to hide this so that people can kind of see. This is the equation, 1 over Cj omega. So as the frequency increases and the capacitance increases, then you have a smaller impedance, which means this becomes a more favorable path. But then as the frequency goes down throughout the rest of your experiment, then only through this frit is the impedance actually, is this actually the lowest impedance to go through. So people add this shunt, this kind of, you know, as you say, a parallel, you know, platinum wire in parallel with a capacitor to the reference. And that's what it does. The thing that this does is it creates a low impedance path when this 8 picofarad capacitor becomes one of the main pathways for EIS. So that's what it does. So Devon, you know, let me know if that made sense. We've talked about it a couple times elsewhere on the live stream. So if you are unsatisfied with my answer, Neil has also had answers in previous episodes. I'd encourage you to look at some of those as well if you have further questions. All right. So let me see. Now, let's see. The next question is from Mr. Drona. I'm working on aluminum air batteries. I want to check the effect of electrolyte via Ca, but we can't go beyond 6 molar due to limitation of reference electrode. What I can do, or what can I do? So I'm not a big expert on batteries or air batteries, aluminum air batteries, to know exactly how to address this. Sorry, to address this specific situation. But it looks like you're trying to do, let's see, you want to check the effect of the electrolyte via chronoamperometry. You can't go beyond 6 molar due to the limitation of the reference electrode. What can I do? So you're making it sound like the reference electrode is causing a problem. So without knowing too much about batteries, this is my simple recommendation. There is something called an internal reference. So you could use a piece of metal, for example, that does work in 6 molar electrolyte. It doesn't decompose, it doesn't change or anything like that. And then I would add a redox molecule into your system that hopefully does not affect or change the electrolyte. But you know the potential of that redox molecule. So even as your system is may drift during the experiment, you can still determine what potential you are applying, and then make it with respect to that moving target. So even though, let's say you're doing an experiment, and over the course of several hours, the potential shifts, right? So the potential of, let's say you're using a platinum electrode as your reference electrode. Let's say the platinum potential is shifting because of just the conditions of your system. Well, I would do a very quick cyclic voltammetry experiment to look to see, hey, that redox species that I have in my system, is that redox peak shifting around, right? Is that peak actually shifting around? And then, but for chronoamperometry, interestingly enough, with chronoamperometry, all you need to do, generally speaking, is just apply a sufficiently high or a sufficiently low potential, and then watch the current decay. You are working with a battery, so I don't know. Chronoamperometry, I think, is a little bit different because you are, in a way, charging. Sorry, you are charging the battery in a way. So, the other thing I could suggest is, the reference electrode. The reference electrode potential is based on the Nernst equation, right? So let me let's see. So the Nernst equation is this guy. Let me hide this. And the Nernst equation, just generally speaking, and the reason why I'm going off to the side like this is because I originally designed this so that when Neil and I are both on, I'd be on one side, he'd be on the other side, and then we would talk, and this wouldn't get in the way. But because I'm here and not him, I have to move to the side, which is fine. This is actually kind of fun. So the Nernst equation, which is of course my favorite equation in electrochemistry, states that the potential is equal to, let's see, so the potential coming in from, let's see if I can get it. Yeah, the potential right here is equal to the standard redox potential minus RT over NF. So you have the you have the gas constant, temperature, number of electrons transferred in your redox reaction, divided by Faraday's constant, times the natural log of the activities, in other words, the concentration for all intensive purposes, of your reduced and oxidized species in this type of equation. So that is what governs the potential of the reference electrode. That's what governs it. So if you have 6 molar of a specific electrolyte or a certain species, unless you're running into conductivity issues, I'm of the opinion that you could plug some of these numbers in and then see what the potential is, or if the potential shifts. So, so then let's see. So I don't know whether or not you are. So I don't know whether or not you're running into an issue like maybe a conductivity issue with your reference electrode. But you know that's But 6 molar is actually like it's okay. You can just plug that in. Another thing to keep in mind. This is actually very important, right? So look at this. You have a natural log here. So if the concentration of one species is 10 times larger than the other, it will move by about 59 millivolts. That's how much the potential will shift. So even if you go from, say, a 4 molar solution to a 6 molar solution, which in most of us cases, like that's a lot. Like 6 molar solution, that's a lot. That's not actually, you might not actually shift the potential that much. Pardon me, in your system. Of course, if your reference electrode, of course, does not have that as part of the internal fill solution, and it's in the, 0.01 molar or 0.001 molar, then, oh, yeah, you're going to be shifting by several hundred millivolts each time. So that is something that I would think about and work on, and I don't want to say worry about. But yeah, the potential's got to move. The concentration has to move quite a bit to make a substantial impact in the shift in the potential. So, Mr. Drona, I hope that was helpful. Okay, hopefully that was very helpful. Okay, I'm gonna just take a quick look to see if there's some stuff. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm just checking to make sure that all the other things on the live stream are going. So, of course, if you're on YouTube, if you're on LinkedIn as well, and hopefully we'll be streaming to other platforms in the future. I just have to. Actually, if you have recommendations for platforms where there are other electrochemists who could benefit from this, please let me know. Okay. So I think I got most questions. All right. So Mr. John, yes, thank you. All right. Very good. I'm glad that made sense or helped you a little bit. And my wife is on. So yep. Thank you. All right. Let's see the next one. This is a question from earlier. This actually came from one of my videos on chronoamperometry that I put out about a month ago, an introduction to chronoamperometry, which I recommend you check it out on the Pine Research YouTube channel. So in that video on chronoamperometry, I mentioned that the time it takes to charge the electrical double layer is 5 times RC, 5 times the solution resistance times the capacitance is the amount of time, kind of the time constant, to charge the electrical double layer, and hence current measurements that are within that. Let me actually, I don't have to, you don't have to guess what I'm saying. I can actually just share this with you right now, just so that we're all on the same page. All right, so let's just go here. Okay. All right, so does everybody, all right, so everyone can see this. So in chronoamperometry, happy to talk a lot about chronoamperometry. I know so much more about it now. So in chronoamperometry, we step the potential, we see the spike in the current followed by a gradual decay. So this is a little bit imaginary. Not, actually it can look like this. But I mentioned that there's a certain amount of time here where the charging of the electrical double layer is occurring. And that amount of time is 5 RC, which means that this current is convoluted. It has both Faradaic contributions as well as double layer charging contributions. And so the question that we've been asked, my colleague, is, the video is very helpful, and he is curious about Dan Gurigu-C6X. His question is, how can someone find the R and C of our experiment? Because we need to know that in order to determine the control plot. So let's just finish up. So there's several ways. There's actually many ways, if you will, to determine R and C. What is R and C? So typically, the easiest and the most straightforward way to determine R and C is impedance spectroscopy. So if you do EIS, that's probably the easiest way to get both of these, because if you have a system, and I model this as like having some solution, oh God, that's a bad picture. If I model this with having some solution resistance, and then double layer capacitance, and then charge transfer resistance. All right. If I do that, and I need this R, this is my R in this case, and this is my C, then if I do EIS, I can use circuit fitting to determine my R and my C. And that's actually the easiest thing to do. You can actually determine, say you get some dots and stuff like that. You fit your system pretty well, maybe not perfect, but you kind of know this value because the R in this case is the impedance that is just on the, and this is Z, negative Z imaginary, and this is Z real. So this value at the high frequency is, generally speaking, equal to the solution resistance. This assumes, this is also the point where the phase angle is 0, which is basically the point where it should just be a dot where Z imaginary, negative Z imaginary, or even positive Z imaginary is 0. So that's our R value. There are some other calculations that are used to try to look at this kind of semicircle to determine what C is. But most software with circuit fitting capabilities has the ability to determine C, and you can determine the amount of farads of capacitance with EIS. It's the most direct way to measure RC, because in one experiment you can get both values. That's probably the main advantage of it. Determination of RC from other mechanisms is a little bit more complicated, and I don't want to say convoluted, but generally speaking, maybe complicated and convoluted. There are, in addition to EIS, there's really 2 to 3 other techniques that are used to determine the solution resistance. So this is how to determine R. So one is current interrupt. It's a technique where we charge, if you will. So let me go back to review. So one is current interrupt, and that's an experiment where, similar to chronoamperometry, we were looking at the change in the time. So we're actually looking at, say, a potential drop. So we charge, we hold a constant current. So the I is constant. So we hold the potential, and then we disconnect the counter electrode, and then we observe a drop. Not that dramatic, sort of say. But we observe this drop, and then a slow kind of decay. And this drop is close, not exactly, there's a lot of fitting that needs to be done, but this drop in potential can help you determine what the R value is, right? Just the R. Because you're effectively charging the capacitor, and then the instantaneous drop in the potential is associated, because there's no time delay. This actually relates to EIS in some sense. There's no time delay associated with the discharging of a resistor. It's instantaneous. But then the rest of it, the slow decay out, is actually associated with the discharging of their capacitor. So the instantaneous stuff that happens on the very fast time scale, that, so V equals IR, the voltage drop, so this is like a delta V, is equal to I times R. You know what I is because you held it at a constant value. And then you look at this change in voltage, you can then solve for R. So that's one way. There's current interrupt. There's another technique called positive feedback. I don't want to get too much into positive feedback unless there are no other questions. But it looks like Mr. Drona has a question. I will get to. I will answer it relatively soon. But positive feedback is a technique, and maybe what might be best to do is I actually will open up a separate PowerPoint slide. So let me see if I have this. Give me 1 second. Okay, so actually, this may actually be a better way of describing it. So I'm gonna replace the sharing screen. So let me go to this. This is a presentation I did some time ago. All right, so these are just some of the methods for determining solution resistance. I talked about impedance. This is current interrupt. And so actually to kind of look at current interrupt, yeah, you hold the potential, you watch a step, IRU, and it's all based on this type of circuit, this like RU solution resistance, double layer capacitance, and charge transfer resistance, but it's really these two. Potential step is the same type of thing as current interrupt. It's just kind of the opposite in the way. It's really chronoamperometry. So let me just describe positive feedback. Positive feedback is when it's actually the way that a potentiostat compensates for solution resistance. And positive feedback involves applying a potential step while gradually increasing the amount of feedback that the instrument takes in. So the potential step is applied across the working and reference electrode. And that potential step is equal to we can think about this, the electrode surface component, and then the voltage drop, the IRU. And so we keep increasing this value over time. So the potentiostat is constantly increasing the value until the potential step is equal to, just E of the surface. And this part no longer kind of contributes, sort of say. So the way it looks is you keep applying these potential steps. You increase the amount of compensation by a certain amount of ohms, and then eventually you run into overcompensation. And somewhere around here, this 40, 45, 50 is where we have overcompensated, and that 50 ohms is the solution resistance. So that's how you get R. Those are the primary modes for determining R. Now, let me just finish off by saying that there's another way you can get C. So let me talk a little bit about how you can get C. One way to get C, which is maybe not the best, but it works relatively well, is to do a series of cyclic voltammetry experiments. So you're doing cyclic voltammetry. You get some duct that looks like this. You want to do scans within a region where there's no Faradaic processes, right? So you want to scan between here and here. You want to go back and forth. And you want to get this kind of box shape. And you want to increase the scan rate. Actually, it's not going to look good. You're going to get this box. And then at increasing scan rates, that box is going to increase. So this is when your nu goes up. Your scan rate in your CV increases. This is going to grow. The current that is measured here is equal to the capacitance times dV dt, which is the scan rate, which is this guy. And so as you change this and you measure a new increasing current, because the current here is increasing as you increase the scan rate, you can then do a linear regression. You can look at the scan rate versus the current. You can get a straight line, hopefully. And then the slope of that line is equal to C. That is a way that you can get the capacitance of your system. So that's how you can get R and C. You can use it through impedance methods. That's the easiest. That's one technique that gets you everything. Or you can get it through some of these DC methods as well. So hopefully that helps you. I know I left that as a comment on the YouTube video, but I thought it might be a little bit easier to explain during the live stream. And hopefully I'll try to link that to you. Okay. Mr. Jordan has a follow-up question. I have a question. What if I'm not using a reference electrode? What will happen? Will it work on open circuit voltages? Yes. So, again, I don't know enough about aluminum air batteries. I just know that you have an anode and a cathode. I may have Neil talk a little bit more about this, but we may need to have a little bit more information. The open circuit voltage is basically in your battery. You would hook your battery up to just basically it's the voltage when no current flows. But I would imagine that will change as you're doing experiments on your battery. But the open circuit voltage, as long as it is stable, is not a bad thing to make reference measurements with. When you have a reference electrode that does not change during your experiment, during your time, then you know what's happening at your anode versus your cathode independent of one another. The open circuit voltage will contain contributions of both anode and cathode in them. It's the voltage difference between them, effectively. So, and sometimes that's fine. Sometimes the open circuit voltage is the best way to go about it because reference electrodes really are not very helpful or can't be used in some situations. In fact, for battery research, batteries don't have reference electrodes. It's just the voltage difference between two terminals. So, so I would need to know a little bit more about your system, like what exactly you are trying to do. You're trying to do, okay, yeah, so you're trying to do chronoamperometry. So check the electrolyte via chronoamp. So one thing that's going to happen is so chronoamperometry, you typically apply some kind of potential and then you make a measurement. So when you mentioned having a reference electrode, I imagined you were applying or setting a potential, and then you were measuring the current response as a function of time. But that may or may not be the case. And with open circuit voltage, yeah, if I just had the two terminals and you were looking at how, say, the anode you were looking at the anode, the chronoamperometry current on the anode, for example, as a function of different electrolytes, well, it will change. The open circuit voltage will change when you measure the current. Yeah, I'd really have to. I feel like I have to kind of punt this to Neil, as he really knows perhaps a little bit more about what would happen, or if you can actually set the voltage, for example, and then do your chronoamperometry experiment, telling one thing to be a certain potential. Most of the time when people do chronoamperometry, they set a potential that's way higher or lower than the quote redox potential of your redox potential of your system. So that usually so even small changes in the open circuit potential shouldn't make a huge difference, but they could. So I'm sorry, Mr. Jonah. Hopefully, if you're able to join us next week, Neil will be here, and you can ask that question to Neil for more, perhaps another opinion or another view. But yeah, as long as the open circuit voltage doesn't change, I think you should be good. Let me put my pop filter back on while I wait a little bit for more questions. Let's see. You know, if I just have to talk like this for now, that's okay. I don't think I'm too annoying. My voice sounds too bad. The pop filter is really just for p sounds and s sounds, things like that. Okay. It looks like right now there are no questions. Yeah, thank you for trying to tune in. Maybe next week, that'll be when Neil is here, and he'll be able to give you perhaps a better answer. A couple kind of quick notes, a couple bookkeeping things. I will not be in next week. I will actually be giving a talk at MIT. So if you're in the Boston area, the MIT ECS student chapter has invited me to run a small talk. I'll be talking about IR compensation, one of my favorite topics. It's a subject that is not covered in any great detail, I find, in most electrochemistry courses. It's really somewhat of a fringe subject, but there's actually quite a bit of depth to how solution resistance affects your results and affects measurements. There are some nuances to it. I think sometimes fundamentally it's not that complicated, but at the same time, we generally sometimes overcomplicate things quite a bit. So I'll be giving a talk at MIT. It'll be at 11 a.m. I'd reach out to the MIT ECS student chapter to get more information about it. There is registration required for it. I think they only have spots for like 25 people. But I will be at MIT in Boston next week, Friday. That's October 18th. So if you are in the Boston area, and you want to say hi or ask me a question live, you're more than welcome to do that. So that's what's going on there in terms of upcoming events. And then just recently, this past week, or earlier this week, I should say, we had the ECS Prime meeting in Hawaii. And so my colleague Tim and Neil were both in Hawaii. So hopefully if you were in Hawaii or at the ECS meeting, they should have been there, and you could have, at least stopped by and said hello. Lastly, the couple conferences that Pine will be at the MRS meeting, the Material Research Society meeting, towards the end of November. So it's the last week. The week after Thanksgiving is when the MRS meeting is. I will not be there. I usually go, but it's a little bit busy, and I will actually, instead of that, I will be giving a lecture on EIS at Rutgers University. So if you're at Rutgers University or in the New Jersey area and you want just a short lecture on just an introduction to electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, Professor Kate Waldy is teaching an electrochemistry class this fall, and I'm just giving a guest lecture on impedance around that time. So if you are in that area, if you're in New Jersey, if you're in Boston again, you can reach out and find us. ECS student chapters. I'm trying to think. I will be at the SciEx meet, which is actually a spectroscopy conference, the week after MIT. So if you're in the Raleigh-Durham area, if you do spectroscopy, I will be there, mostly because it's nearby. It's nearby where Pine is. And my formal training is actually in spectroscopy. I did electrochemistry. I spent most of my graduate time learning electrochemistry and kind of fine-tuning it here at Pine. And I would say fine-tuning it. I would almost say completely relearning it from scratch. But I like Raman spectroscopy and IR, UV vis, all those types of things. And so I'm looking forward to seeing not any ultra fast stuff. Ultra fast spectroscopy I find to be very, very complicated, and I have a lot of respect for all the people who do ultra fast spectroscopy, because it is very, very difficult physically to do. It's very, very sensitive, but you can learn a lot, and it requires a lot of quantum mechanics to understand what's happening. So anyway, with that said, those are some of the things that are happening with Pine. It doesn't look like there are any questions. If you do have questions in the future, of course, please we'll put something up on the next live stream event, and you'll be able to join us for that. All right. Again, thank you for stopping by, asking great questions, and I'll see you soon. Playing with some of the new features here.